Everyone smile. Wow, we've come a long way since the first one, Martin. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Mark Raginse. I've been a psychiatrist for about 40 years now, working because of two things. One is I was very interested in psychosis and the way the mind works differently from different people. And I was also interested in the dream of deinstitutionalization, how people could live amongst us who previously had been locked up and isolated. And I'm also here as an aging recovery revolutionary. I am one of the older faces, I suppose. And I realize it's up to the younger faces, so I'm here to try to be somewhat inspiring and instructive to the next generations coming forwards, because I think recovery really is a revolution. And in responding to Martin's comments about Plato, who I usually can't understand, I will try to use some of my own life and my own experiences, or some of my living going along, to be the way to talk about recovery more than talk about definitions or too many, statistics or things like that. So to begin, this is a picture of me when I had a young face, talking outside with one of our home members. That was Karen. I am just old enough to remember when medicine was supposed to be a practice, that you were supposed to learn from your patients, you're supposed to listen to them, and each one you'd get to be a wiser and wiser practitioner over time as you got more and more experience. I'm also just young enough to remember when we started not doing that, when we said, no, the important information comes from research. The important information comes from universities. The important information comes from evidence-based practices, comes from fidelity to the model, to did you write a paper about this? Rather than did we learn from each other? And recovery, I'm convinced, has to be built upon learning from each other, from listening carefully to the stories of people of how they are living their lives, how they do actually recover, and learning from that. But recovery must begin with hope. You cannot recover if you have no hope about things. You can't see a better future. You're not going to try very hard or work very hard to try to get a better future. And when I was first in training, the psychiatrists who trained me and the other people in the medical center, they were not very hopeful about people with mental illness recovering. They didn't talk about recovery at all. They thought schizophrenia was a chronic deteriorating condition. Those people with the serious mental illnesses, see them as fast as you can and give them their medicine, and then spend your time with people you can do therapy with who could actually benefit from your services. Well, maybe there'd be some hope if they invent some new medicine, because after all, the only reason we could close those hospitals in the first place was because we invented a good thorazine medicine, chlorpromazine, so that people could leave. And they put all their hopes in teaching us about the next new medicine along the way. But that didn't seem like enough hope to me. That didn't seem like enough hope for how to get to know someone well, how to walk alongside them. Actually, I'll tell you a story. So when I was in college, my father was actually the judge in the mental health court in Los Angeles. And he would have people come before him for whether they should be forced to be in a hospital or not. And this is the first time I met people with serious mental illnesses. And I remember this young girl. She was about the same age as I was at the time, I think about 19 or 20. And she was in the hospital because she had manic depression, and the doctors wanted to keep her there so that they could try the then brand new lithium to see if it could help her. and she wanted to go home. She didn't want to stay locked up in the hospital anymore. And her parents had been taught by the doctor to tell the judge that she couldn't come home with them unless she cooperated with the doctors first and took her medicine first, that she couldn't leave. So she had to argue that she could take care of herself without her parents to be able to let go, and that she wasn't dangerous and she could take care of herself. But she couldn't. She was just a teenager. It occurred to me I couldn't have, if my parents stopped supporting me at that point, and I couldn't have passed that test either. And my father, as a judge, said she had to go back to the hospital and take her medicine. Now, I don't tell that story particularly because of the legal part, although I do think America is very addicted to coercion and having these court hearings about locking people up. I tell that story because I was watching her in that court, this young girl, and I was relating to her. And she was so upset. This was probably the worst day of her whole life to that point. She was being locked up. She was helpless. The court is confusing. I mean, I had grown up in courts because my father and my mother were both lawyers, but she didn't know that the people were what they're talking about. All she knew was that she was the bad one. She was the one on trial. She was the one who was going to be locked up, even though she hadn't committed any crimes. And I thought at that point what she really needed was somebody to be standing alongside her who knew what was going on, who could help guide her even in this very worst day of her life as part of the process. Maybe lithium would help, maybe it wouldn't, but she needed somebody alongside her, and there wasn't anybody. And that wasn't enough hope to say, well, they'll invent another good medicine. I wanted to know how I could walk alongside people, how I could help them to be able to recover in their lives. So I looked at other places besides what I was taught in psychiatry. One place I looked was a hospice. Hospice is actually the single best person-centered thing in all of medicine. Once the doctors give up and say, we can't do anything, you're cancer, then we help the person. I don't know why it is we have to give up first before we help the person, but that's the way it's set up. Then we say, what are your goals? What's your spiritual? What's your family? Can we help you at home? What do you need? Can we help you with these emotions? Can we become very caring and close to you? I was the only medical student who spent any time at the hospice. And I said, this is really a much different way of being a doctor. I also went to a 12-step recovery program. I was the only medical student who went there, too. And I said, this is a different way of doing things, where you have people learn about a program and learn about intellectual things, about choices they've made, emotional things. They're supported by a peer who's been there with the same kinds of things. They share the things they're ashamed of with people who don't judge them. They learn about their spiritual lives and make a program. They help with their shame and their guilt, the moral inventory. This is a whole different thing than I've ever seen in medicine. There's some hope there. Alcoholism is a terribly difficult thing to do, and here's a whole bunch of people recovering by helping each other. And I also went to a clubhouse. This was just for a visit, and all the people were the psychiatric patients who I was used to seeing doing nothing and just sitting in the corners and this or that. They were there running this thing. They were making lunches for each other. They were on the phones. They were doing things. The place was full of life. It's like, these people can have lives and do things if we get out of their way and they have roles to play. I said, those are really interesting. There's some hope in these things. And I kept them in the back of my head. I also, believe it or not, got some hope from old psychoanalysis. I did a little project on psychoanalytic approaches to schizophrenia. I think I was the only one who had checked out those books in 20 years from the library, and I don't think anyone checked them out after me. But there were some of those old psychoanalysts who worked really hard to connect to people who were hard to connect to understand the meanings of their delusions, of their hallucinations, and what they'd been through, and to help them emotionally heal. Even though I could hardly understand most of the languages these people used, and I have no idea how they managed to communicate anything to their patients, here was a way of saying our relationship and our connection might help you heal. One other thing I have to throw in just for the point is I went out of my way to meet R.D. Laing. He was a very old, he was an aging revolutionary at the time. He was in Los Angeles. How many of you know who R.D. Laing is? Almost nobody? Shows how no one's going to know me in 40 years either. So R.D. Laing was a few more hangs. You're just now willing to admit that you know who he is. He was a very iconoclastic anti-psychiatry guy from England and he was on this panel that I went to see. And I couldn't understand anything he said. He was talking about how we'll help psychosis when the planets are aligned and the moon and a love for everybody. And he was talking about this program he had. And I couldn't tell whether the man was enlightened or psychotic or both or what was going on. So I went up to him afterwards and I said, you talked about your program where people come in and you help guide them alongside, work through things. That's what I want to do. Does it actually work? Do you have any outcomes? Did you do any research about this? He said, no, but it works. We still haven't learned that lesson, have we? Do some outcomes research. Then I said, all right, you said that the way to help someone with schizophrenia is love someone with schizophrenia. I said, I'm having a hard time doing that because I'm in the inpatient ward and I'm here locking them up and I'm having these hearings about them and they just want to leave and they're mad at me and stuff. And I can't really connect, and it's going very badly. How am I supposed to do this? And he said, you seem to have a good heart to me. Just keep at it. It'll work out. So I did. That's all I learned from R.D. Laing. I also went to Skid Row in Los Angeles, which it's not as bad as it is today, but there were thousands of homeless people there. And nothing was working of any normal thing. And I saw them doing all kinds of different things than I'd seen before. I saw case management for the first time. I saw home visits. I saw social drop-in things. I saw medication management where they helped hand out people's meds and brought them to them. I made my reputation one day when I actually took a long-acting injection, a shot to someone's little terrible hotel room and gave it to her in the hotel room rather than locking her up so that she could get her medicine. And I came back to the medical center excited about all these things I'd seen, and I brought this big black book of resources, and they just weren't interested. They wanted to keep doing things in the very illness-centered way they had before. So by the time I left, I had a bunch of ideas that were all things I wasn't taught, or I was taught on the edges, or I was the only one who went looking for that experience. But there were things that were possible. And I think if you start at the beginning, start with what you can learn about what's possible, what doesn't fit in quite right, what seems to be working that maybe shouldn't be. And I got a lot of hope by listening to people who had recovered from schizophrenia. And these are two of my favorite people. I have such a big mouth, I got to be on stage with both of them. And by the way, advice, never follow Patricia Deegan after on stage. She is such an amazing speaker. She had everybody in tears, and then I couldn't connect with anybody. But that's not the point of this slide. For those of you who don't know these people, Dan Fisher was learning to be a psychiatrist, a neuropsychiatrist, MD, PhD at Harvard. And he was in a lab, very isolated, working on brain chemistry. And more he worked on the brain chemistry, and he decided he has no will, he's only his chemicals, and he stopped being able to move and became catatonic, and they diagnosed him with schizophrenia, and they put him in the hospital and made him take medicine. And it got worse and worse. Until he figured, wait a minute, I do have a personality. I am not just an illness, I am not just my chemicals, I am not just a diagnosis, I am not just biology. I am actually a person, I'm going through an emotional crisis. And what I really need is somebody to go through it with me. Now, this is something I can relate to. And I've copied his picture, and I think I've copied his artwork very well. He drew it on a napkin one day when we were doing a presentation together. of people when you're by yourself and you're thinking to yourself and you're talking to yourself and you're feeling yourself and you start making more and more of this cage that you're stuck in and this hole that you fall into, as opposed to when you're with someone else and you feel with them and you talk with them and you connect with them until you start to open up space and hope starts coming through and he started to come alive again and move and feel like a person again, and went back to medical school, became a psychiatrist, doesn't take any medications, got married, has kids, has no symptoms. He recovered entirely from schizophrenia, which led people to say, so he must have had the wrong diagnosis in the first place. No, he got better by connecting to people and through the emotional parts of it. He's worked through his life working on peer support, something for the public called emotional CPR, which is about helping people through crisis and helping give them the space and relationship to be able to find your own solutions to things. Patricia Deegan was also going to college when she became psychotic, and they put her in a hospital and gave her medications. And then they stopped the voices, but then she couldn't think straight. And they said, you have to take these forever. But now I can't think straight to go back to college. So, well, you have to. It's because of your illness. This is what your life's going to be. Get used to it. And she said, what I need more than anything else is hope. She's our poetess of recovery, talks about it, that recovery comes, it's a plant that you're watching to see when it's going to grow and when it's going to grow and when it's grow. And then you miss it, and there it is growing, and you didn't see when it first started. It's there now. She talks about a conspiracy of hope. And she talks a couple, when I look for little things to put on the slide, it's amazing how many good quotes she has. And I'll say a couple of them just so those who don't speak English can get them translated. One says, our challenge is to be bold and brave and daring enough to remain human-hearted while working in the human services. To stay caring and not turn into just bureaucrats and machines. She says, we are a conspiracy of hope, and we are pushing back against a strong tide of oppression, which for centuries has been the legacy of those of us who are labeled with mental illness. We are refusing to reduce human beings to illnesses. That lady knows how to talk. I also got hope from some research, although, frankly, this research wasn't shown to me in my training. It came out in 1987 when I was in residency. It's hot off the presses. How many of you have ever seen this piece of research by Courtney Harding? Like 3 people. This is an amazing piece of research, and by the way, if you want to know more about it and do some English, Courtney is now 80 years old, and 2 months ago she put out a book about this research. And I'll tell you the story a little. Courtney she was a good girl growing up, and she married her high school sweetheart and got a couple kids and became a nurse, and it's going along until about her 40s when it started falling apart, and she didn't have a husband anymore, and she wanted to become a psychologist instead. So she goes back to school, and she's supposed to do some research project. And they said, you know, that state hospital where you work at, the old doctor, he's got some old records from the first Thorazine studies of these patients, and some very careful records that are in the attic and stuff. These people were there 25, 30 years ago. It might be a good study to go and find them and see what happened to them. Well, she went and looked, and she really liked this doctor, and he told her about the program. These were the patients in the hospital diagnosed with schizophrenia who did not respond very well to the first medications. They were the back wards people smearing feces on the walls. No one had any hope for them. But he said, no, we're going to move them out. So the staff made a halfway house. People could live in on and off for 2 years while they found a place to live in the community and a job and reconnected to family and social things. And he gave them a little bit of medicine. So she goes and finds them all. And she doesn't do a research with the normal checklist. They do ask about quality of life. They sit and have dinner and lunch with people. They spend hours doing things, connecting people. And what she found was that 2/3 of them recovered. Look at those numbers on that slide. Half of them are working, and these people are in their 60s. Only a small fraction were in the hospital that had any symptoms. They have a social life indistinguishable from neighbors. If you say recovery is being living along people, having a life and working, being productive, no symptoms, 2/3 of the group had recovered. And the most amazing thing about that, in our way of thinking, is that those people who recovered, they weren't on medications anymore. It wasn't they recovered because they took their medications and they kept their chemical imbalance in their brain together for the rest of their lives. They used medications to restore their lives, and then they didn't need them anymore because then they were connected to other people and had a life going. Their psychosis went down when you didn't give them neglect and oppression. That piece of research inspired a whole generation of recovery workers and people with recovery, even though people are never told that when you go to an emergency room. Do you know what? Even though you've had terrible schizophrenia, you've been in a hospital, and all these problems have gone on, you have at least a 2/3 chance of recovering. If only you can manage to find a place to live and a job and reconnect to people, it'll happen. That's not the message we give, but I took hope from that. And so California in 1990 wanted to say, we can do better than this. Deinstitutionalization really isn't working. We have people on the streets and people in jails and stuff. Let's try to do better. Let's make a model program for the best a program can be. This was a wonderful opportunity for me just a few years out of school. And I put all those hopeful things I'd learned all those places together. And we took all the hopeful things we could find anywhere. We took an ACT team and put it inside of a clubhouse and added psychosocial rehab and supported housing and supported employment and integrated substance abuse treatment and a whole, it wasn't even called recovery back then. It was called psychosocial rehab culture of the way we got along with people. We asked them what their goals were and we empowered them and we did all these things. And we did it with a staff that was unusual too. We had a combination of some staff that was professionals, some staff that was non-professionals, and some staff who had experience with serious mental illness. First time I was expected to ever be a coworker with someone with schizophrenia. That's the person who needs my help, not my coworker. What are you doing here? I had to adjust. I had to figure out how I can be part of all this without turning all the people back into patients, how I can put the illness aside and to see them as full people. We were allowed to be very innovative. We were allowed to do everything integrated so it wasn't fragmented all over the place. And the last point is probably important too. We weren't allowed to discharge anybody. We had to stay responsible for them no matter what happened. And we actually even had to pay their bills. So if they disappeared and then in a hospital, we had to pay the hospital bill. This was especially important for people who use drugs, because I'd been taught that if somebody uses drugs, just tell them to go away until they stop, because I couldn't help them anyway. But then I was stuck with their bill. So I had to figure out how to connect with people who are using drugs. There was no harm reduction and motivational interviewing at the time. We had to learn it as it came along. So what happened to our program when we put all these things into effect? We had a nice bubble. We had good political support. The normal system didn't like us because they thought we need that money instead of you. And of course, the normal system doesn't like being the control group of here's the new play, here's ordinary services. You never want to be the bad part of the control group. And one of the things I want to emphasize is how we spent our money differently than the system. We had control over the money. They gave us the money up front for each person and said, spend on whatever you want, but you have to pay for it and tell us what you'd use the money for. Notice how in the normal system, the top 3 expenditures are acute hospitals, long-term hospitals, and therapy. Between those 3, it's like 3/4 of the money. Notice in the village, the top 3 are vocational employment services, case management, which that meant going around helping them live a life, finding housing, helping their money, taking care of things in the community, helping them pursue their goals, and socializing and connecting with people in the community. This is really crucial. For people to recover, the key thing isn't for them to be treated successfully and their symptoms to go down, and then they can be rehabilitated and have a life. This is the same as Courtney's research. The key thing is, can you help them with whatever supports, whatever medications they need? And notice, this isn't an anti-medication model. We spent the same on pills as they did. It's the same 10, 11%. I was handing out pills to lots of people. But I was using the pills to help people get a home, a job, and social connections. And once we did that, the crises would stop. They were connected, they had purpose in life, it stopped. Instead of running around doing crisis things all the time, instead I built protective factors. Money to live on, a place to live, spiritual connections, family connections, a purpose in life and identity. These things are roles. When you have these protective factors, you don't end up in crisis in the hospital. It doesn't fall apart nearly as often. Occasionally, but not nearly as often. If we made that one change that says the social determinants of health, the things that happen to you as a person and you as a connected community, are every bit, if not more important, than your symptoms and your medications for your recovery, we would change many people's lives. We even had a little piece of research that showed your chance of recovery once you were from stability to get better depended more on whether you had a job and a place to stay than on whether you were taking your meds and what your symptoms were. I was never taught that piece of information, and almost nobody publicizes that. So how did we do? We had an outside evaluator for the first 3 or 4 years, and they said we had the best outcomes across quality of life outcomes at any program they'd ever seen. We had about a 70% reduction in homelessness, in jailing, in hospitalizations. We had about a 400% increase in employment. We had no suicides for 10 years. There was even a huge reduction in attempts, too. About 2/3 of the people who had histories of using drugs were in serious recovery. And the families and the clients all liked our services better. An outside auditor came by one day to see what's really different about this program. And he noticed 2 things. One is he says, you really do have an open front door. You're really accessible. When somebody comes in and says, I need to talk to somebody, there's somebody there they know, and you talk to them. You don't say, sorry, the next appointment is 2 weeks from Thursday. Or, is this an emergency? Are you suicidal? That's how you make people suicidal. Let's say you only talk to them if they're suicidal. We were accessible. And the second thing he knows, he said, when somebody told you what their dreams were, what their hopes were, what their plans were, what their goals were, you took them seriously and helped them work on it, instead of saying, oh, no, that's not realistic. You better make it something smaller you can actually do. If the goal had meaning to them, you were willing to work on it with them. And almost nobody dropped out of our program. When I had worked in the normal clinic, after a year, half the people had been lost to follow-up. In this program, less than 10% were lost. That was the original outcomes. Now, the outcomes changed over the years as the world changed. Sometimes we had a terrible recession and there were no jobs, and our employment job did very badly. But since it was a recession, housing was cheap, so we could get people housing. Sometimes it was a terrible increase in housing prices, and we ended up with more homelessness, and we couldn't do that very well. Sometimes it was a government that cut all kinds of things. Sometimes it was the government decided to let a lot of people out of jails. Different things happened over the years, and things got better and worse depending on what your community is. You need to keep adapting as things go on. We're not the only program that has managed to do things differently. This is a giant list of programs mostly from America, but they're actually from all over the place. Actually, what they are mostly is on the edge. None of these programs are the center of any system. They've all figured out how to make an exception, a little bubble over here, a little area, do something different, make a little room to do something different. All these different programs. And yet, almost none of these are in common use. We still do the same things. Short-term hospitalization, long-term hospitalization, medications, therapy, crises. We don't do hardly any of these, maybe a little demonstration here or there, a pilot program. So why is that? Why can't the system do new things that work? What's wrong here? What does this have to do with recovery anyway? Why isn't this just a failure to be innovative? Here are some reasons why the medical model cannot do these things. One is the medical model, at least in America, only funds illness-centered services. America may well have the number one most expensive healthcare system of the developed countries, and the last of the social welfare systems of paying to actually help people with their lives. If you rely on just people's medical care or mental health care that's around their illnesses or disease, let's treat your illness, you're not going to do services that help them as a person for a better quality of life. The medical culture also has a tradition. I'm supposed to act like a doctor, and you're supposed to act like a patient. You come with me with something wrong, some weakness, and I will come with you with something right and some strength, and I will help you. I'll tell you what to do, and you will follow my orders, and you'll get better. By its very nature, that is not an empowering relationship. None of us feel at our strongest or our most empowered in a doctor's office. We're always a little bit hesitant, and do I even speak up, and can I contradict? And most of us are kind of weak and oppressed when we talk to doctors in the first place. It isn't set up to be a collaboration. It isn't set up to be a shared responsibility. You're supposed to be under the doctor's care. The doctor is supposed to be responsible so long as you follow his orders. It's not, I will be a guide walking alongside while you take responsibility for your own life, even if you have serious impairments. The standard medical model says I have to be responsible for any mistake you make. Unless, of course, you don't follow my directions, in which case it wasn't my fault. Also, the medical model only keeps track of people's symptoms and their illnesses. It doesn't keep track of their quality of life. How are they working? Where are they staying? How's their life going? Are they going to school? Are they having children? When we closed our state hospitals in America, we brought the same medical model, the same coercive model, the same, you've got to take your meds or we'll force you model from the state hospital. We didn't change how we thought. We just brought it to clinics and places in the community. We didn't say we need a whole new way of thinking. That new way of thinking is recovery. And I want to be very specific in what's different about recovery. Because although Martin's right that it's very difficult to describe or define recovery, we can describe 3 things that recovery does that are different than the standard system. One is we focus on the whole person, not just the illness. It's not just good enough for the person to be treated, their illness, how are they doing? Actually, let me tell you one quick story here. My mother was a traumatized child and grew up to be a very stubborn, self-willed, strong-willed lady who was very, very successful. But she had to have everything her own way. And she did very, very well until her mid-70s when she got breast cancer. and that she couldn't fix by herself. So she went and had treatment, and the treatment was very successful. They did an operation, they gave her some radiation, they gave her some hormone therapy. The treatment was a success, the cancer was gone. But she was never the same. She had pain from the drain in the incision below her breast, even though it shouldn't have been for years and years. She never again wore a bathing suit. She never went swimming. She never went back to the gym to exercise with the other younger lady. She was afraid of her own appearance. She felt weakened and traumatized by the whole thing. The treatment was a success, and the patient didn't recover. This is a very common outcome in mental health. Patricia Deegan's treatment was a success. They got the voices better, and now she couldn't think straight enough to go back to college and live her life. We need to have a treatment that helps the person recover, not just treat the illness. That's the first huge, and it's the biggest one. That's the same thing that hospice did. Those stages, remember from Death and Dying, about denial and anger and depression and bargaining and acceptance? I think I got them out of order. But anyway, those aren't stages cancer goes through. Those are stages the person goes through. The 12 stages of AA, those aren't stages that the illness of alcoholism goes through. Those are stages the person goes through. Recovery programs are person-centered. Second thing is, recovery programs are client-driven and collaborative. They are not about me giving you orders and you following them and complying. They are about me engaging with you, finding out what's important to you, what your goals are, working alongside on your goals, collaborating, shared decision-making, empowering you, taking risks together that are necessary to grow so that you can go back to growing and developing into the person you were meant to be. The nature of the relationship changes from the medical model to this. Coercion is not really a part of recovery. You may need it on rare occasions, but we have become entirely too addicted and dependent on coercion. And the third thing that's different is this isn't about fixing what's wrong with you. You may never stop hearing voices. You may never stop having nightmares from being raped. You may never stop having panic attacks or some mood swings. You may never get perfectly sober. But did you get your life back anyway? Were you able to do things that had meaning to you? Were you able to get jobs, housing, family, children? Did you have a life? You don't have to be cured. You have to become resilient. When the next inevitable bad thing comes, it happens. The next relapse, the next voices, the next bad boyfriend, the next person dying. Are you strong enough to handle it, both inside and outside? Do you have enough connections and enough things in your life, enough protective factors to handle it? A recovery system has to be person-centered, client-driven, collaborative, and strengths-based. Look back for a second at those programs here. Every single one of these is person-centered, collaborative, and strengths-based, and that's why the regular system can't embrace them, and they have to be only on the edges. And think for yourself that when you are at your best, on either side, whether you're a clinician or someone helping someone or a peer advocate helping someone getting better, or if you're the person who's trying to struggle and recover yourself, when you are at your best, aren't those three things happening? Isn't it person-centered, collaborative, and strengths-driven? Think of the most effective experiences you've been a part of. We started applying those three things to everything we did, not just to the treatment relationship. Let's have our funding be person-centered, outcomes-driven, collaborative funding. Let's how about the administration? How about the way we treat our own staff? Instead of being bullying to them and giving them orders, let's have a relationship-based growth model for our staff. Let's deal with crises as though there are opportunities to grow. Let's build the strengths in our community and our resilience. When something bad happens, instead of figuring out who to blame, let's figure out if we have enough strengths to get through this together and to get through the next inevitable tragedy too. Because you can't predict what terrible thing's going to happen next. We applied these same things. In my personal life, I did recovery-based parenting, recovery-based husbanding, recovery-based retirement planning, recovery-based everything. We even figured out how to make a whole system of care that looked like this, not just a little program on the side. I'm not going to go through the whole thing here, but to give you an idea here, people say, oh, it's unrealistic, or a little program for this person or that person, but not all these people. No, recovery has a space for everybody. You can start with the people who are extremely dangerous, who do need to be in some locked setting, and how you're going to engage them. You can be people who are unengaged. You have outreach, home visits, engaging them at drop-in center. I can't read it backwards. For people who are doing better, they're engaged and working with you, but they're not too well coordinating. They don't function very well on their own. You can do things side by side. You can be a case manager with them, an ACT team. You can have a clubhouse. You can have supported services like support employment, supportive housing, rehabilitation, give them subsidies. And as they're getting self-appoint responsible, now they can actually make an appointment. We expect a lot of people to come to appointments who are not self-responsible. I mean, I remember when I was in residency, they were teaching us different kinds of psychotherapy, and they said we have to look around for good psychotherapy patients, which meant, somebody who was motivated and introspective and verbal and intelligent and all these things. And I was very sarcastic then, too. I said, do you think maybe you could teach us some kind of therapy that works with the patients we actually have? There is a recovery approach for wherever you are in recovery. If you're tied down in restraints, how are you going to get responsibility back? How are you going to get me to trust you again? How are you going to make amends for what you just did? If you're unengaged and don't want to talk to me, how are we going to engage? How will I meet you where we're at? If you mess up everything, you're trying to do it and you're not responsible for things, how will I teach you side-by-side in vivo learning? If you are responsible and doing well, how can I have you plans for yourself? Can you make your own medicine? Can you have RAP plans, wellness recovery action plans? Can you do an advanced directive for your next crisis comes? Can you do things to deal with maybe some of your childhood trauma you haven't dealt with? Can you do things like meditation for self-improvement? There's something that's recovery-based for everybody, wherever they are. It isn't just for some people. I worked for a while at a university with college students. This stuff works incredibly well with them. We even created a fair bit of the system ourselves in Long Beach. We made some of these different programs. I liked working on the welcoming team, where people first came and you're first engaging them at the beginning. We had it going. Made a system. But ultimately, we did not change the whole world or the whole system. We were a very successful bubble. We were a successful pilot program. I was there for 27 years. And we did a lot of good things. We had thousands of people came to visit us from all over the world. Watch how our programs went. I got to be on stages like this all over the world. I wrote things, books and articles, all kinds of stuff. We won a bunch of awards. We inspired other people to try things all over the place. I even got Martin to help write a textbook chapter once. We created tools that I'll talk about tomorrow in a workshop if you're interested. And then we went for the home run. We got California to pass a tax on millionaires. This is a tax of 1% of your money after your first $1 million a year. To give you some idea about the wealth inequality in California, that tax, 1% of your excess of $1 million, today generates between $2 and $3 billion a year. Means they're making $200 to $300 billion, these people. And we said we're going to make the whole system look like the village. Make a whole system with all those things happen. We got the money, set it up, and it didn't work. One is, it's a very different set of skills to make a little bubble around the outside or to be an outside revolutionary as it is to be an inside reformer and working within a system or changing an actual system. We found the system was missing things that were very hard to build. There was no vision of recovery. I've tried to share you how I got a vision of recovery, but the system of itself says, nope, if you can't force them to take his meds, there's nothing you can do. Look, they're on the streets, they're in jail, that's what happens. We need more hospitals, we need more locking up powers. We need to change how things are paid for and who's paid for. We need a lot of places for people to connect to each other so they're not isolated. And we need to change who's doing the work and how they're supported so they don't burn out. And we need the community to buy into this. We need better storytelling of what we're doing. It's worth me telling a little bit so you'll know what specifically made us fall apart, although some of these are more American factors than yours. One is the funding for doing things medically. We no longer had our person-centered funding, and once we started to doing a billing for all these illness-centered things, it fell apart. We no longer had control of the hospital funding, so the hospital started hospitalizing people that we didn't want hospitalized. We started being more risk-aversive instead of helping people take risks they needed to grow. Our whole neighborhood got gentrified and more expensive, so they didn't want us around anymore, and they threw us out of the neighborhood because it got too expensive. And, you know, things happen, a recession, a pandemic, a housing crisis. And eventually the leadership said, you know what, I just don't care about recovery that much. A new leader came in and said, we did that before. Let's just worry about how our money's doing and if our contracts are okay. And she stopped doing it. And the one that got me was there was no way for anybody who was poor on disability or a low-level job to live in any housing in Los Angeles anymore. Los Angeles is now up to 70,000 homeless people. And it's just almost impossible to help someone recover while they're homeless. It's a very intractable problem. So, that's my ups and downs as a recovery champion and as an aging revolutionary. Where do you fit in? How do you feel boxed in by these current paradigms? What would you like to explore and make happen? What things have you discovered or wondered about could be applied from different areas? What ideas do you got? And can you be someone who begins to change the system? A true revolution like this takes generations to do, not just we'll have one law or one change and one funding thing and it'll happen in a year or two. Whatever you do, make sure you listen and learn from the people we serve. Make sure you build and sustain hope, nothing but for yourself and for them and for the system. Make sure you are welcoming and inclusive on every level. And make sure you do the 3 transformations: person-centered, client-driven, and strengths-based. If you do that, you can carry on the revolutionary torch. Thank you all for listening to the presentation today, and I hope you'll carry forwards. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Moc děkuji Markovi. Mark, we are having extra time. I was lost in time. So, máme prostor na 2-3 otázky z publika. 2-3 questions for you from the public. Yeah? So, takže kdo chcete, tak zvedněte ruku, tamhle naše kolegyně Veronika.
Actually, let me tell one more story.
Yeah.
It's a hard story for the translator. So see if you can make it work. Some of you may know this story already, but it's my best story. A man came into my office late one afternoon, and he holds up his hand like this. He says, "What do you see?" I said, "I see your hand." He says, No, be more specific. I said, "Okay, it's late and I'm tired, but I can do this. I can see the swirls of your fingerprints. Everyone is different. I can see the creases between your knuckles. And I can see your love line and your lifeline. I don't know which one's which, but I can see them." He says, when you can start to see nails and knuckles and hair, then you will be able to start helping me, because you will be seeing the world from my side instead of from yours. Recovery is something they do. We don't recover people, they recover. We need to know what's going on to them, to meet them where they're at, to help them recover.
Děkuju. Tak 2 otázky z publika. Zbyněk tamhle vzadu, Veroniko, hlásí se. Běží spojka s fialovými vlasy.
Do I need my headphones to listen to this?
Jo, možná jo.
I don't have a question to you, but I want to tell you thank you, because when I read your book, Recovery, Way to Recovery, it was the book which gave me meaning of my previous experience with mental illness, and this is how I can remember what happened to me, and thank you once more for your presentation, for being here, and have a nice day. Thank you.
Wow. That so touches my heart. Thank you so much. As I mentioned at the very beginning, I believe in learning from our patients and people. So when someone like you says, the things you wrote, they captured what happened to me, they helped me make sense of my experience, they helped me have a better recovery, I know I did it right. I did my job.
Díky Zbyňku. Ještě jednu věc publika, to je proti reflektorům, to teď nedržím kvůli reklamě, to až potom. Děkuju.
Way in the back. Okay,
Hi, I was really touched by you describing the current situation of your village and past village and so on. And I wonder, what do you do to keep hope for yourself maybe, or for the things that you feel are important for you? Thank you.
So, some days I have better days and some days I have worse days. Today is a better day. I don't think that we need to get attached to any one thing, any one program, any one legal bill, any one project we're working on. They're all important, don't get me wrong. But whether it succeeds or doesn't succeed will not be because I succeed or don't, or my program is not here anymore. It'll be because a whole movement has been created. And the movement, I believe, is a true revolution. And revolutions take a generation or two. Revolutions go through a phase where everyone is rejecting and saying, this makes no sense and you're just wrong and throwing you out, to another phase where they say, oh yes, we believe in this, but they're not doing anything any different. to the next phase where they say, oh, we always believed in that. I don't know what you mean we didn't agree with you in the first place. To the next phase where it actually gets into people's hearts and they actually do change. I think most people, on my best days, I try to touch people's hearts and I try to remind myself why I got into this in the first place. I remember about that girl back in my dad's court and say I was there for a lot of people through their worst days, and I think I've helped a lot of other people like you all be there for somebody else. I receive about once a month or something, maybe a little more, some kind of little email or some kind of call or something, like the man in the first question said, who said, you know, I read your papers and did this, and we set up this drop-in program in this wellness center in some place, and it's been running for 10 years, and thank you so much. And I'm like, well, that's very cool. That I think it's not about any one thing about me, it's about changing hearts and an overall movement along the way. And as far as for me personally, as long as I continue to grow, in January this year, I stopped doing clinical work. I retired because I have enough money. But I keep doing this. Not that Martin pays me a lot of money, but keep doing this. He pays me enough. I should more than he has probably. Because I am so convinced that recovery will help so many people's lives, both the people we're working with and the staff. It is so much better to be a staff in a program where you can keep your heart alive instead of when you're being coercive and focusing on illnesses. It just keeps your heart going in practice. So I keep doing this. Whenever anyone invites me, I do something. I keep writing things or doing things like this. And I keep working on growing myself. See if as long as I shouldn't be stuck even though I'm a little bit older. Let's see if I can grow and develop and learn new things too. So that's what I do.
Thank you. Thank you.